The first thing Gus saw was not the baby. It was the way the snow had swallowed the truck, as if the wind had been trying all night to erase it from the world, and somehow failed. He eases his tow rig onto the shoulder of a 2-lane highway outside Taos, New Mexico, headlights cutting tunnels into the storm. It's late enough that most of the town is asleep. Out here, there's just the hiss of the wind, the low rumble of his engine, and the isolated glow of a pickup half buried in white. Dispatch had made it sound routine. White Ford. No movement on the GPS for over an hour. Night be empty. Just check it out, Gus. He's heard that line too many times to believe it's ever truly empty. The truck sits crooked in a drift, nose pointed toward the drop-off where the land falls away into dark piñon and juniper. Snow is banked up over the wheel wells. There are no footprints, no open doors, no hazard lights flashing. Just a lump of metal, slowly smoothing over under new snow. He kills his engine, and the silence closes in. The world shrinks to the crunch of his boots and the beam of his flashlight. Snowflakes spin through the light like ash. Another one, he mutters, more to the night than to himself. Another stranded driver. Another call in a long winter of calls. A lifetime of dragging strangers out of ditches has taught him to expect the same scene over and over. Empty cab, forgotten fast food cups, maybe someone embarrassed, waving from the back seat. As he gets closer, his light skims across the tailgate, the thin antenna caked with ice, the rear window completely frosted over. The doors are sealed with a crust of snow turned to ice. He wedges his gloved fingers into the gap and yanks. At first, nothing. Then the rubber seal gives with a groan, and a rush of frigid air spills out, colder than the air outside. He feels it on his face, that dead, stored away cold of a space that hasn't known warm breath in hours. The door swings open. For a moment, the beam of his flashlight lands on all the usual things. The steering wheel, a discarded coffee cup, a scarf on the passenger seat. Nothing moves. Then he swings the light toward the back. There's a car seat strapped in, facing the rear window. In it, the small shape of a baby, bundled in layers that suddenly feel far too thin. Lips pale, skin with that waxy look Gus has seen before and never wanted to see again. For half a second, his mind gives him the worst answer. Too late. His throat closes. His hand starts to shake. And then the light catches something else, a shape of fur. At first, he thinks it's a blanket, the way it's draped, the way it fills the space around the baby. But the beam glints off an eye, yellow and alive, slit pupil shrinking against the sudden brightness. A bobcat. A wild bobcat. Thick winter coat dusted with frost is curled around the baby in the snowed-in truck, body tucked tight like a living ring. One paw hangs over the edge of the car seat. Its chest rises and falls, slow and steady. Its tail is laid gently across the baby's legs, as if to hold in any last bit of heat. Gus feels the world tilt. He has been on crash scenes where metal twisted like paper. He has stood in ditches with flares burning in his hands, listening for sirens that came too late. He has seen what winter can do to a person who stays out in it too long. But he has never seen this. His first instinct is raw and old. Step back, slam the door, put something solid between himself and those eyes. Every story he's ever heard about wild cats near people, every warning about claws and teeth and danger, rushes up. Instead, he does something very small. He stays. He holds the light steady and watches the bobcat's ears flatten against its head. The animal doesn't lunge. It doesn't snarl. It simply tightens its body a fraction, as if bracing against the cold that rushes in now that the door is open. The baby's chest moves. Barely. Gus hears a thin, broken sound, more like an exhale than a cry, and it cuts through him sharper than any wind. His free hand reaches for the radio clipped to his chest by habit, but his eyes don't leave the scene in front of him. Dispatch? His voice scrapes out rough, unfamiliar. I've got an infant here. Hypothermic, breathing but shallow. And you're not going to believe this. But there's a bobcat in the back seat. It's wrapped around the kid. There is a pause on the line. Then the voice on the other end changes from bored to alert in a heartbeat. Copy that. Stay clear, Gus. EMS and wildlife are en route. Stay clear. Every safety guideline he's ever memorized is suddenly at war with the image in front of him. Gus could back away now, close the door, wait by his truck until sirens slice through the quiet. No one would blame him, but the baby makes that small sound again, and the bobcat's ear flicks. He finds himself whispering without meaning to, "Stay with me, kid. Just stay with me." There's a difference between watching an event on the news and standing inside it, breathing the same air. For someone sitting at home, this might sound like a headline. Tow driver finds bobcat curled around baby in snowed-in truck. For Gus, it's not a story. It's a moment stretching out, snow blowing sideways past the open door, his own past loss stirred up and hanging in the frozen air. Sometimes, life doesn't crack open with big speeches or dramatic music. It changes in a single held breath, a single choice not to walk away. As you listen to this night unfold, you might think about your own moment like that. The time you opened a door expecting nothing, and your whole life quietly shifted instead. Hold that memory close. It will help you feel what comes next. Because to understand why Gus is here on this road, on this night, and why a wild bobcat walked toward a human cry instead of away from it, we need to step back a few hours into the rhythm of his winter before the storm turned him toward this truck. Stay with this road and with him for a little while longer. Before Gus opened the door of that snowed-in truck, winter had already become his sentence. Every year, when the first snow dusted the mountains outside Taos, other people checked their heaters and brought in their plants. Gus checked the chains on his rig and told dispatch, "Put me down for nights." He said it like a favor. It was really something else. On the evening this story begins, the storm is still just a promise on the horizon. Inside a roadside diner on the edge of town, the world is warm and ordinary. There's the soft clink of silverware, the hiss of a grill, a low country song leaking from a small radio in the kitchen. Gus sits alone at the end of the counter, hands wrapped around a heavy white mug. The coffee isn't good, but it's hot, and that's enough. He doesn't have to order. The mug appears in front of him because it always does. The owner, Eleanor, wipes the same spot on the counter whenever she's nervous, which is often on nights when snow is in the forecast. She glances at the weather on the TV over the pie case, then at Gus. "Bad one?" he asks. "They say maybe." She shrugs. "They always say maybe." He nods. They've had this exact exchange before, almost word for word. That's the point. Familiar words are easier to carry than the ones neither of them says out loud. To anyone watching, Gus looks like a man who just prefers night work. He's good at it. He knows every curve of Highway 68, every pull-off, every place the wind likes to drop a drift across the asphalt like a trap. He can hook a car in the dark by feel more than sight. The truth is quieter and heavier. Years earlier, on a night not so different from this one, there was another storm, another call. Another car lost control on black ice along the canyon. Only that time, it wasn't a stranger's vehicle in the ditch. It was his wife's, his little girl's. He was supposed to be driving. A last-minute job came in. He said yes. They said they'd be fine. Everyone says that, until they aren't. By the time he got there, the glass was already covered in snow. No one in the diner knows the full story. They just know that after that winter, Gus stopped taking summers off and started volunteering for every snow shift. It looks like dedication. To him, it feels like standing a post. Out on the road, he has a ritual. At a certain mile marker, just a small green sign most drivers never notice, he always does the same thing. 2 light taps on the steering wheel with his fingertips. He never told anyone why. He doesn't have to. The motion is for the 2 people who aren't in the truck with him. If you've ever carried a loss into the later years of your life, you might know this feeling. You don't talk about it much anymore. You just build small routines around it, like stones around a grave, so you don't trip over it in the dark. On quiet nights, when the sky is clear and the stars are sharp, those roads almost feel peaceful. Gus will drive for hours without seeing another set of headlights, the tow rig humming, the desert lying black and still on either side. He almost forgets why he signed up for every shift. But when the weather turns, the punishment begins again. We watch him now as the wind picks up outside, pressing against the diner's windows. A weather alert scrolls along the bottom of the TV screen. Heavy snow, falling temperatures, hazardous travel. Eleanor tops off his mug without asking. "You could say no sometimes," she says, not looking at him. He stirs the coffee twice, watching the swirl. "Road doesn't care who's tired," he answers. She doesn't argue, but she does one small thing, slides a paper bag toward him, 2 breakfast burritos wrapped in foil. "For later," she says, "in case you forget to eat." It's such a small kindness, but it's one of those moments that feels larger than it looks, the kind that lingers with people like you, who know how much quiet gestures can mean. Someone choosing to make sure you don't go hungry, even when they can't stop the storm that's coming. Outside, the first flakes begin to fall, not the gentle kind that make you want cocoa and a movie, but the sideways kind that tell you the wind has plans. Gus pays his tab, leaves a tip that's too big for 1 cup of coffee, and shrugs on his jacket. At the door, he pauses just for a heartbeat, looking back at the warm light, the pie case, the familiar faces half hidden behind steam. Eleanor catches his eye. "You call if it gets bad," she says. He gives the same answer he always does. "It's already bad. That's why they call me." There's no bravado in it, just a fact he's accepted. When other people stay home, he goes out. When other drivers pull over, he keeps going. When winter comes, he treats it like a duty he owes to a road that has already taken too much from him. If you've ever kept yourself endlessly busy so you don't have to sit alone with your own thoughts, you might recognize something of yourself in him. Some people punish themselves with blame. Others punish themselves by never letting themselves rest. As Gus steps out into the cold, breath fogging in front of him, we watch the glow of the diner window slip away in his side mirror. The snow thickens. The world outside his windshield shrinks to 2 bright tunnels of light, carving a path through the dark. Somewhere above that highway, in the dark hills and broken rock, a bobcat is already beginning its own winter patrol, paws silent on fresh snow. Gus doesn't know that yet. To him, this is just another storm, another night of towing stranded cars. In a moment, dispatch will radio in the GPS coordinates of a white pickup that stopped transmitting. And because this is who he has become, he will say, "Send it my way." Before we follow that call and the snowed-in truck that waits at the end of it, take a breath with him here. Notice how your own body feels when you think about the roads you keep driving out of habit, the ones tied to old memories. If you can, stay with this story a little longer. The same winter that has been punishing Gus for years is about to bring something unexpected into his headlights. And into yours. Long before Gus saw that snowed-in truck in his headlights, another set of eyes had already noticed the storm. Up on the low ridges above the highway, where pinon and juniper twist out of the rock, a bobcat moves through the dark. The wind is harsher up here. There are no headlights, no radio, no pie case glowing in a diner window. Just snow, rock, and breath. His name in our story is Coda, but of course he doesn't know that. What he knows is winter. He knows the way the snow crusts over at dusk and softens again near dawn. He knows how to place each pore so the surface holds, how to spread his weight so he doesn't punch through the top layer and waste precious energy. His whiskers read the air like fingers. His ears swivel to sounds we would never hear. On a normal night, his route is almost the same. A slow patrol along familiar ledges, dropping into shallow washes, weaving between juniper trunks. It's not a straight line, more like a loop ridden across the hillside. A mark here, a pause there. He's not wandering. He's remembering. Far below, the highway draws a thin silver line through the dark. Even when snow covers the asphalt, Koda can still smell it. Hot metal, antifreeze, oil. For a wildcat, those scents mean danger. Somewhere in his first winter, near this same stretch of road, there was a memory he carries, the way Gus carries his mile marker ritual. A collision, a burst of light, a scent of burned rubber, and something sharp and metallic in the cold. After that night, the smell of the highway settled into him as something to avoid. Most nights, he does. Tonight, the wind is wrong. It rushes down off the mountains and presses the smells of the valley up into the hills. Koda can taste snow in the air, but also exhaust, wood smoke from distant chimneys, and the faint tang of de-icing salt. The storm that has Gus checking his chains is the same one that makes Koda's fur stand on end. He stops in the lee of a boulder, sides heaving slightly from the climb. The snow here is untouched, except for rabbit tracks and the straight shore line of a fox. He listens. For a long time, there is only the usual. The small rustle of a bird shifting deeper into a shrub, the muffled thump of snow sliding from a branch, the far-off hum of a semi on the main highway. Then, under the wind, he hears something that doesn't belong. It's not quite a cry, not the way we think of it. More of a thin, broken sound that rises and falls irregularly, like a heartbeat out of rhythm. It leaks through the storm in pieces, carried and torn by the gusts. To a human standing in the same spot, it might sound like the squeak of metal or a distant coyote. To Koda, tuned to the smallest change, it's clearly other. He freezes, one paw lifted off the ground. This is where real animal instinct shows its complexity. He's drawn to sound, to movement, to the possibility of food or threat. At the same time, the air is heavy with the highway's scent. Antifreeze, old rubber, cold metal. The two impressions collide inside him. Go, don't go. If you've ever stood in your kitchen late at night with a phone in your hand, wondering whether to call someone you haven't spoken to in years, you might recognize a quieter version of what his body is doing. Step toward, step back, listen again. Koda makes a small circle on the hillside, testing the wind from another angle. The sound comes again, thin and raw. He lowers his paw. This time when he moves, it's toward the highway. He doesn't charge straight in. That's not how a bobcat works. He uses cover, rock, scrub, the shadows of small trees, slipping closer in short, controlled bursts. His coat, mottled with spots and winter thickness, blends with the patchy snow. As he drops lower, the smell of the road sharpens. But there's something else under it now. The faint sweetness of formula, the sour note of human clothes worn too long between washes, the rubbery scent of plastic and vinyl. The white pickup is half buried against a drift, just as Gus will later see it. But Koda approaches it first, from above. To him, it's just an odd square thing in his path, humming faintly with leftover engine heat trapped under the hood. He circles the truck once, keeping his distance, twice, 3 times. Each time he passes the rear door, the sound inside is a little clearer. A hitching inhale, a soft, broken whimper. He could leave. His whole life has taught him that the road and the things that ride on it are trouble. But he doesn't. On the 4th pass, he steps closer. Snow squeaks under his weight. He tests the metal with one front paw, claws barely touching. The door creaks in the cold. He flinches back, ears flattening, then waits. Nothing moves. No engines roar to life. No doors swing open. Little by little, he raises his head to the broken corner of glass at the back window, where snow has blown inside, leaving a small gap. Warm air, just a trace of it, slides over his whiskers. The sound is very clear now. He gathers himself and jumps. Inside the cab, his claws scrabble for a second on the hard plastic before finding purchase on a jacket tossed on the floor. The air is heavy with cold and the smell of someone who left in a hurry. On the rear seat, the baby is slumped sideways in the car seat, bundled but still losing heat to the night. Coda pauses on the mat, body stretched, muscles tense. He could pivot and launch himself back through the gap. Instead, he moves forward in short, careful steps until the front of his body touches the edge of the car seat. He lowers his head. Warm breath fans across the baby's face, stirring a faint flicker of movement. The bobcat's body, built for stalking in sub-freezing temperatures, holds more heat than the thin air of the cab. He doesn't know words like protect or rescue. He knows warmth and cold, tight space and open, sound and silence. In that small, human-made cave of metal and glass, the warm thing is the only thing that feels alive. So he does what a bobcat does on a winter night, when it finds the warmest place in a frozen landscape. He curls around it. From the outside, nothing looks different. The truck is still half erased by snow. The wind still blows. Headlights flicker far off on the highway. But inside, fur presses against fabric. The tail drops over tiny legs. Two wild lungs breathe steadily against a smaller, faltering rhythm. For a while, that is enough. When we talk about this later, it will be easy to call it a miracle. For a moment here, you might simply sit with the fact that a wild animal, following its senses, stepped over its own fear of the highway and into a space it was never meant to enter. In the next part, we'll go back in time again, into that cab before Coda ever arrived, and meet the woman who left her baby there, hoping someone would find him first. If you can, stay with Coda in your mind for just a few seconds more. The weight of him, the quiet of that truck, and carry that image with you as we listen to her side of this winter night. By the time autumn pulled onto that mountain road, the storm outside wasn't the only one she was driving through. In the hours before the truck sank into the snow, her night started in a small cluttered kitchen on the edge of town. The overhead light buzzed. A stack of unpaid bills leaned against the salt shaker. Somewhere in the next room, a TV played too loudly, covering words she did not want to hear anymore. She had a baby in her arms and another on the way. The house didn't feel like a home. It felt like a place where shouting lived. If you've ever walked through your own front door and felt your shoulders tense instead of relax, you already understand more about her than any headline ever will. Austin moved around the kitchen on autopilot. Warm a bottle, rock the baby, check her phone, delete messages, try again. At some point, in a moment when the house was quiet enough to hear her own thoughts, she opened a browser and typed in words she thought might save them both. Safe place to leave baby. Surrender laws, near me. What happens if I can't keep my baby safe? The answers were confusing. Legal language, hotlines, addresses she had no way to reach that night. Shelters that closed at certain hours. Words like relinquish and custody made her throat feel tight. In every direction she looked, the path felt blocked. Inside this house, there was volatility and addiction, and a temper that flipped from fine to dangerous in seconds. Outside it, systems she didn't trust and stories of mothers judged before anyone learned what they survived. So she did something desperate and deeply human. She tried to build her own version of a safer choice. The plan, if you can call it that, formed in small, shaky steps. Drive out toward the main road where trucks and snowplows would pass. Park where someone would see the headlights. Leave the baby in the truck, bundled as well as she could manage, doors locked. Call for help from the highway. Get herself to safety. Hope that strangers might be kinder than the life waiting back home. It's not a good plan. It's not a safe plan. But standing in that kitchen, with her heart pounding and her options shrinking, it felt like the only doorway that wasn't nailed shut. She dressed the baby slowly, even though her hands were shaking. 2 onesies, a sweater, a little hat that had been a gift. She tucked in the blankets, then tucked them in again, as if more fabric could stand between him and what might come. "Someone will find you," she whispered over and over, the words brushing his forehead like a blessing. "Someone will find you." Out in the driveway, the wind already had teeth. The truck's engine coughed, then caught. She backed out, taillights touching the edges of the house one last time, and turned toward the foothills. As she drove, snow began to snake across the road in thin lines, then thicker ones. Headlights from the occasional passing vehicle smeared into bright ghosts. The world narrowed down to the arc of light in front of her, and the tiny mirror where she checked again and again to make sure the baby was still there. A mile or two onto the smaller mountain road, things changed fast. That's how winter works in places like this. One turn, and you're not just in a flurry. You're in a wall. The wind hit the truck broadside. Snow whipped sideways, turning the world into a white blur. Tires slid. She turned the wheel the way she remembered from driver's ed, but the road was slit glass now. The truck fishtailed, lurched toward a drift, and with a heavy, final shudder, it stuck. The engine sputtered out. Silence rushed in. For a moment, she just sat there, hands locked around the wheel, heart pounding so hard she could hear it echo in the cabin. The baby squirmed softly in the back, letting out one thin, sleepy sound. This is the part where people watching from the outside will want to shout advice at the screen. They'll want to say what she should have done. That's easy to do when your feet are warm, and you know the end of the story. Inside that frozen truck, Autumn felt three things at once. Terror of staying, terror of going back, and the thin thread of hope that if she could reach the main road, another driver would see her, call someone, and get help to the truck before the worst of the storm hit. She checked the baby again, adjusted the blanket, turned the ignition one more time. Nothing. Her shoes were wrong for the snow. Her jacket wasn't made for this kind of wind. She opened her door anyway, and the storm stepped in with her, clawing at the warm air, stealing it away. At the last second, she leaned into the back seat. She pressed her lips to the baby's forehead, breathing in his scent as if trying to memorize it. "Someone will find you," she said again. This time the words broke. Then she stepped out into the dark. The walk that followed was not brave in the way movies usually show courage. It was clumsy and painful, and fueled by a mix of panic and stubbornness. Every step away from the truck felt wrong, but every thought of turning back felt worse, like walking back into a burning building. Snow climbed over her shoes, packed into her socks, numbed her toes. The wind pushed against her chest. She wrapped her arms around herself and kept putting one foot in front of the other, eyes stinging, breath tearing at her lungs. If you've ever kept going long after you ran out of strength, just because the alternative felt unthinkable, you know a quieter version of this walk. She never reached the main road. Somewhere along that narrow stretch, body and willpower finally parted ways. When rescuers found her hours later, half buried in a drift, she was barely conscious. She woke under fluorescent lights, in a bed that wasn't hers, sheets rough against her skin. Voices drifted in from the hallway. And the baby in the truck. They say a bobcat was curled up around him, like a blanket. Doctors think that's what kept him alive long enough. She didn't sit up. She didn't call out. She just turned her face toward the wall, hands fisted in the sheets, and let herself cry in a way she hadn't allowed in years. Quiet, shaking sobs that no one tried to stop. From the outside, it will always be easy to say she abandoned her child. From the inside, in that kitchen and in that truck, what she tried to do was leave him where someone would find him before the violence in her home did. Holding both of those truths at the same time is uncomfortable. It's also honest. In a different kind of story, we might follow Autumn further, watch her rebuild, and bring her into the diner years later. In this one, her path is mostly off-screen, but her choice, flawed, desperate, rooted in a twisted kind of love, sets everything else in motion. It is the reason a wild bobcat named Coda hears a cry. It is the reason Gus will later open that truck door and see a sight that breaks him open in a new way. As we move back now to that snowed-in pickup, to the moment rescue finally arrives, I'd invite you to keep a small space in your heart for her, not to excuse what she did, but to remember that many storms are invisible until the night they spill out onto the road. In the next, with EMS on the way, and meet the quiet hands in the hospital, and the Wildlife Center, who pick up the story where hers leaves off. If you can, stay with them a little longer. This is where winter begins to loosen its grip. By the time the first siren pierced the storm, 3 lives were already pressed together inside that frozen truck. A tow driver, a newborn, and a wild bobcat. Gus stands in the doorway, one hand on the frame to steady himself, the other holding his flashlight. The beam rests on that impossible scene, the baby still in the car seat, and Coda curled around him with the determination of something that has chosen a spot and intends to hold it. The wind keeps trying to slam the door shut, as if the night itself doesn't want witnesses. On the radio at his shoulder, dispatch has gone from routine to urgent.
EMS is 5 minutes out. Wildlife unit en route. Stay where you are, Gus. Don't engage the animal.
Copy, he says, though he's already engaged in the only way that really matters. He's not walking away. He shifts his light a little, careful not to blind the bobcat more than he has to. Coda's pupils tighten. He doesn't growl. He doesn't bare his teeth. Instead, he draws in tighter around the baby's torso, as if the open door has let the cold back in, and he's taking that personally. The baby's chest moves again, shallow, sticky breaths that catch and stutter. A faint sound slips out, and Gus feels it all the way down his spine. If you've ever stood over a hospital bed or a crib, counting breaths in the dark, you know that feeling. The terror of stopping, because what if the next one doesn't come? He speaks softly, his voice surprising even himself. "You're doing good, kid. You too, buddy." He's not sure which one he's addressing. Maybe both. 5 minutes in a winter storm feels like an hour. He watches the snow gather on the truck's floor mat, blown in by the wind. He watches the way Coda's fur lifts and falls with each breath. He pays so much attention to the baby's chest that he loses track of his own. At last, a flicker of red and blue washes across the snowbank. Headlights slice through the whiteout behind him. The sound of the siren swells, then cuts as the ambulance pulls in at an angle, backing up toward the shoulder. A wildlife officer's truck arrives seconds later, tires crunching over the packed snow. The stillness inside the cab gives way to movement outside. Doors slamming, boots pounding, voices shifting into that calm urgency people use when they've done this before, but still know what's at stake. A paramedic climbs up beside Gus, squinting into the flashlight beam. Is that? Bobcat, Gus answers. He's been on the baby since I got here. Looks like he's keeping him warm. There will be time later to argue about whether that's what really happened. Right now, what matters is what they do next. They work out a plan in low, quick sentences. The wildlife officer draws up a mild sedative, the kind they'd use on a small wild cat caught too close to a ranch. The paramedic readies a blanket, an oxygen mask small enough for an infant. The moment they've been moving toward comes down to a few careful seconds. The wildlife officer leans in from one side with a pole syringe, hands steady from years of handling everything from raccoons to cougar. Gus keeps the light trained just above Coda's eyes so everyone can see. The paramedic waits at the other door, ready. The needle slips in. Coda startles, but there's nowhere for him to go. For a heart-stopping moment, he almost lifts a paw, claws flexing, then seems to think better of it. Sedation is not instant. It comes like sleep, creeping in around the edges. As his muscles soften and his head lowers, the baby's body shifts, sliding slightly away from the heat. The paramedic steps in as soon as it's safe, hands gentle but sure. "Hey there, little man," she murmurs, more to soothe herself than the child, as she unbuckles the straps and gathers him up. His skin is cold under her gloves, colder than it should be. She wraps him in a foil blanket, then another, then tucks him inside her own coat against her chest. For the first time since we entered this truck, Coda is no longer touching the baby. The space between them feels bigger than it is. Gus watches as they carry the child to the waiting ambulance, snow swirling around their legs. He takes one last look at the bobcat, now fully under, body slack, but chest still moving. "Don't worry," the wildlife officer says quietly, catching his eye. "We'll take care of him too." Those words land with more weight than the speaker intends, because tonight isn't just about one rescue.
It's about what happens when people decide that every being, human or not, deserves someone to show up for them. In the hospital, fluorescent lights wash everything in a pale color. The ER is small, the kind that sees more sprained ankles and farm injuries than dramatic emergencies. But when the paramedic bursts through the doors with a bundled infant and those words, "Found in a truck, hypothermic, still breathing," the room shifts. A nurse who has been absent-mindedly charting at a computer stands up so fast her chair skids. In another life, she held her own child's hand through long nights of beeping monitors. That experience sits just under her skin, always ready to rise. She checks the baby's temperature, tucks warmed blankets around him, and adjusts the tiny oxygen cannula beneath his nose. Later, she will find herself coming back to this crib again and again, long after she's technically done her tasks, just to rest a hand on his foot. An older doctor listens to the baby's chest, eyes narrowing at the faint but steady rhythm. "Cold bought him time," he says softly. And they don't know about Coda's winter patrol, about the smell of antifreeze and the memory of his own loss near the highway. They don't need to. Their job is to hold the line between this child and the worst of what the night tried to do. In a corner, he could have driven back into the storm by now, returned to the work he understands: winches, tow chains, stalled engines. Instead, he waits. You know what he's doing without needing many words. At one point, the doctor steps out, touches Gus's shoulder. "He's not out of the woods," he says, "but he's here." That counts for a lot. There's a tired kindness in his voice, the kind that comes from seeing both outcomes, good and bad, and still choosing to show up each shift. Somewhere arranging transport for a sedated bobcat who has become part of this story whether he wanted to or not. It would be easy to see tonight as a single miracle. A headline about a bobcat curled around a baby in a snowed-in truck. But standing here with Gus in this quiet hallway, you can see another layer. A string of small, steady choices made by people who will never trend on social media. A tow driver who didn't slam the door and leave. A paramedic who wrapped a stranger's child inside her own coat. A nurse who can't stop checking a monitor. A rehab worker who answers a late-night call about an injured wildcat without a second thought. As we move next into Coda's time at the Wildlife Center, into debates about keeping him, releasing him, and what we owe the wild animals who cross our paths, it might help to keep these faces in mind. They are proof that on the other end of a desperate decision or a lonely cry in the dark, there is often someone quietly getting out of bed, pulling on boots, and answering. If you're able, stay with this story for a little while longer. The storm is starting to ease, but what comes after? The question of what to do with a bobcat who has already touched a human life is its own kind of weather. By the time the storm had cleared from the highway, Coda was waking up under a different kind of light. Not moonlight, not the faint glow of distant towns. Fluorescent, steady, and humming. The kind of light that never changes with the weather. He blinks against it, a bobcat in a place built by human hands. The Wildlife Center sits a few towns away, tucked behind cottonwoods and a chain-link fence. From the road, it looks like a cluster of low buildings in modest enclosures. To the animals inside, it's a halfway world. Not the wild, not a zoo, something in between. When Coda first arrives, he is still heavily sedated. The staff move quietly around him, the way people do when they've done this many times, but still respect the animal on the table. They check his paws for cuts from glass, his ears for frostbite, his ribs for hidden fractures. They clean a shallow scrape on his flank where metal met fur too roughly. They listen to his heart. It is strong. One of the rehab workers, a man who has spent a lot of winters with wild animals in trouble, runs a hand just above Coda's coat, not quite touching it. "Lucky boy," he murmurs. "You picked one heck of a truck." If you've ever worked behind the scenes in a hospital, a shelter, a rescue of any kind, you know this tone. Soft, half to the animal, half to yourself. A way of saying you're glad they made it this far. That first night, Coda sleeps in a quiet enclosure lined with straw. From his side of the bars, the world smells wrong. Disinfectant, old hay, Other animals layered one over another. Fox, hawk, raccoon. A faint trace of deer carried in on boots and clothing. The staff keep their distance on purpose. They know that with a wild bobcat, too much kindness can become its own kind of harm. Over the next few days, Koda's body tells his side of the story. Blood work shows he was hungry, but not starving. X-rays confirm no broken bones. Paws are tender, but intact. Whatever life he was living before that night on the mountain road, it had kept him reasonably strong. This is where the question begins to form in the rehab team. Is Koda a release candidate, or should he stay? One of the younger volunteers, moved by the story already spreading through town about the snowed-in truck and the baby and the bobcat curled around him like a living blanket, can't help herself.
We could keep him, right?
She asks one evening, watching him pace his enclosure.
He could be an ambassador. Kids would come see the bobcat that saved a baby. We'd be able to raise so much for the center.
It's an understandable thought. People like symbols. They like stories you can point to and say, that one, that animal, that moment.
An older rehabber, the one who checked Koda's ribs, shakes his head.
He's not a mascot, he says gently. He's a wildcat who had one strange night.
He explains, in the patient way of someone who has had this conversation many times, what they know about bobcats in this part of the country. They're solitary, mostly nocturnal. They keep territories marked by scent and memory, moving along the same ridges and washes season after season. They hunt rabbits, rodents, and sometimes young deer. They avoid humans more often than they seek them out. This night, in the truck, was not a job he applied for. It was a collision of instinct, weather, and a sound he didn't ignore. Wild animals don't owe us anything just because they did something that helped us once, the rehabber says. Our job is to give them a chance to go back to what they were supposed to be doing. If you've ever watched someone you love try to heal, you might feel something in this. That tension between wanting to keep them close where you can see them and knowing you have to let them step back into their own life if you really want them to recover. As the days pass, Koda begins to act more like the bobcat he is and less like the idea people have of him. He stalks the perimeter of his enclosure, testing every inch of wire with his whiskers. He watches the sky more than he watches people. When someone lingers too long, he retreats to a sheltered corner, turning his back in a clear statement. Enough. The staff rotates who feeds him, who cleans, and who checks his health. They speak in low tones, never lingering for play. They use what biologists have learned over the years. If a bobcat gets too comfortable with human company, the world outside the fence becomes more dangerous for both. Still, they can't help small moments of feeling. One afternoon, a school group tours the public side of the center. They don't see Koda. His enclosure is off limits. But they see another bobcat who cannot be released because of a permanent injury. The educator points out the tufted ears, the spotted coat, and the way the cat's body is built for silent movement. Someone asks about the baby bobcat they heard about on the news. The educator smiles a little. That one's not a baby, she says. And if he keeps doing well, he won't be with us for long. Wild is where he belongs. There's a quiet truth in that answer your heart might recognize. Just because a story begins with humans doesn't mean it should end with them. Months later, when the snow has melted from the ridges and the juniper berries are starting to swell again, Koda's fur has lost some of its winter thickness. His paws have toughened from pacing, and his muscles are ready for more than the length of a fence. The decision is made. On a cool morning, the rehab team loads a crate into the back of a truck. Inside, Koda stands tense, every muscle reading the vibrations of the road as they climb toward a release site far from busy highways, near the kind of rocky ledges and scrub he once called home. At the top of a low rise, they set the crate down. The door faces an open stretch of land that slopes into broken rock and scattered trees. No houses, no roads, just wind and space. They unlatch the door and step back. For a long moment, nothing happens. Then, in one smooth motion, Koda steps out, crouched low, eyes adjusting to the real sky again. He doesn't look back. He moves forward in a series of short, soundless strides, body language saying everything.
This is where I know how to be. Within seconds, he's gone from sight, swallowed by the same kind of landscape where, months before, he made that fateful choice to approach a truck instead of avoiding it. As you picture him disappearing into the hills, it might help to notice how often in life we try to hold on to the things that saved us, when sometimes the most loving thing we can do is let them go where they were always meant to be. In the next part of this story, we'll go back down off the ridge, into the human world again, to the little diner on the edge of town, where a baby who survived that winter night is learning what it means to be wanted, and where Gus and Eleanor are slowly, quietly, becoming a family neither of them expected. If you can, stay with that diner in your mind for a moment, the jingle of the door, the smell of coffee, and Carrie Coda's wild, vanishing silhouette beside it. Both belong in this story. Long after the plows cleared the highway and the headlines moved on, the real part of this story took place under a neon sign that blinked over a two-lane road. The diner had always been there, humming along on coffee and conversation. Locals came for eggs in the morning, pie in the afternoon, and a little company whenever the nights felt too long. It was warm, predictable, ordinary, until the day a social worker carried in a bundled baby from the hospital and asked Eleanor if she could help for a little while. He was just supposed to be temporary, a placement, a file number. But some storms don't end the moment the snow stops. They linger, reshaping everything they touch. This diner was about to find that out. Eleanor said yes before she had time to overthink it. She'd already buried a child of her own years before, an ache that never fully left. People in town knew that part, but they'd stopped asking about it. Grief is like that. After a while, folks walk around it. Now, here was this tiny boy, surviving what he should not have survived, with no one to rock him at 3 in the morning, and no one to sit in a hard chair by his hospital bed just to make sure he didn't wake up alone. So he came to the diner. They set up a portable crib in the corner booth where the jukebox hardly worked anymore. At first, he looked like a misplaced coat or a forgotten bag. But then he shifted, sighed, let out those small, soft sounds only babies make. Suddenly, that corner wasn't just furniture. It was the center of gravity. Gus started timing his breaks to match feeding schedules. He'd roll in off the night shift, smelling like cold air and diesel, and take the baby, soon to be named Leo, from Eleanor's arms so she could refill coffee mugs and flip pancakes. He'd sit with his big hands supporting that tiny back, listening to the clink of dishes, the low murmur of conversation, and feel something in his chest he hadn't felt since before the accident on the canyon road. Outside, the town slowly wrapped its mind around what had happened. Stories traveled differently in small places. They moved through grocery aisles and church parking lots and post office lines. Did you hear? That baby out on the mountain, the one with the bobcat. They say the cat was curled around him like a blanket.
Only in New Mexico could a diner end up raising a child and a highway miracle in the same week.
People started calling him the Bobcat baby behind the counter and Storm Boy in the booths. Someone dropped off a small ceramic bobcat one night. No note, just set it near the cash register and walked back out into the dark. It stayed there, a quiet reminder of the wild part of his story. The first winter he spent in the diner, Leo's milestones were measured in small, sacred ways that wouldn't make any headline, but might make your heart catch. His first real laugh came when a trucker jingled the bell over the front door on purpose, again and again, just to hear it. His first wobbly steps happened along that sticky tile floor between the pie case and Gus's habitual stool. His first word wasn't mama or dada. It was light, pointing at the neon sign flickering over the window when snow began to fall outside again. If you've ever watched a child grow up in a place that feels like home to more than one person, a church hall, a neighbor's kitchen, a little shop, you know how a building can become part of a family. The diner didn't just serve food anymore. It was raising a human being. There was another regular who played a quiet role in this. Someone your age might feel especially close to. Gloria sat in the same booth most evenings, knitting bag at her side, watching the ebb and flow of people with a patient eye. She'd lost her husband years back, and her children lived in other states now. The diner filled some of those empty spaces, She started knitting hats for Leo,
then tiny mittens.
then little socks. As he got older, she saved a corner of her booth for him, a place where he could do homework or color while Eleanor closed out the register and Gus wiped down the coffee machine. One day, when he was about 7, Leo asked the question everyone knew would come.
Is it true about the bobcat?
The diner went unusually quiet.
Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the radio seemed to lower itself.
Eleanor didn't give him a fairy tale. She told a gentler version of the truth.
How a storm got worse than anyone expected.
How a young woman chose out of fear and love, all tangled together. How a tow driver found him. How a wild bobcat had been inside that truck, sharing its warmth without understanding the word save, only understanding cold and heat and the instinct to stay where another living thing was breathing. Leo listened, eyes wide, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of hot chocolate. When she finished, he didn't ask why. He just said, very quietly, "So I wasn't alone." You could almost feel something settle in him at that moment, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Not all the pieces, that takes a lifetime, but a big one. As he grew, the story followed him. At 12, he Googled himself on the old laptop the diner used for inventory and saw his own baby picture in an article. Infant found in snowed-in truck survives thanks to Bobcat's warmth. There were comments from strangers calling it a miracle, a sign, a blessing. He stared at the screen, then at his reflection in the dark window, trying to reconcile the boy wiping down tables with the baby everyone had so many opinions about.
Some classmates teased him.
Don't stay out too late, Leo, or your bobcat babysitter might come back.
Others treated him like a walking superstition, someone you'd want nearby when life felt risky. One evening, rattled after a rough day, he slid into Gloria's booth. "I don't know if I'm supposed to feel special," he said, "or like some weird story that doesn't belong to me." She set her knitting down and told him something simple. "You're a person, not a headline. What happened to you is rare, yes. But what you do with your ordinary days, that's where your life really is." It landed. Maybe it lands for you too. By his late teens, Leo had something else growing inside him. A quiet pull toward the wildlife world that had brushed against his own. He asked to visit the rehabilitation center where Coda had been taken, even though the bobcat was long gone back into the hills. They let him volunteer. He cleaned enclosures, carried food buckets, and listened to owls shifting on their perches at dusk. He learned how the rehabbers limited their contact with injured bobcats and other animals, not because they didn't care, but because they cared enough to keep them wild. Back at the diner, winters kept coming. Each first snow, Gus still tapped the steering wheel at that mile marker. Eleanor still wiped that same spot on the counter when she worried. Gloria still took the booth by the window, knitting through storms. And Leo, no longer the bobcat baby, just Leo, began sketching on the back wall behind the pie case. At first, small drawings, mountains, trucks, silhouettes. Eventually, a full mural emerged. A tow rig under swirling snow, a diner glowing on a dark road, and on the ridge above, a bobcat watching from the shadows. More suggestion than detail. He never painted it as a tame guardian. He painted it as a presence. Wild, separate, near. If you've ever built your life around a place that held you when you were at your lowest, a kitchen table, a back pew, a bench in a park, you know the power of spaces like this diner. They don't erase what happened before. They give it somewhere to land. In our final part, we'll move years forward, into one winter night when all of this, the storm, the truck, the bobcat, the diner, gathers quietly into a single, almost invisible moment of peace. If you can, stay with that image of the mural on the wall and the neon flickering outside. The story isn't quite finished yet, and the way it settles may offer you a kind of warmth you can carry into your own long nights. Years later, on another winter night, the diner windows glowed against the dark like they always had. Only this time, the storm outside was gentle, And the person standing under the neon sign was the baby who once slept in a snowed-in truck. Inside, the tables had been pushed together to make room. Handwritten flyers taped to the door read, "Wildlife fundraiser tonight," with a small sketch of a bobcat in the corner. The pie case was full. Coffee was fresh. People had come in from side roads and long driveways, shrugging snow from their shoulders, drawn less by the promise of dessert and more by the promise of saying thank you, in their own quiet way, for a story that had lived in their town for years. At the center of it all stood Leo, now a young man, with the mural he painted behind him. A tow truck in a storm, a tiny diner on a dark road, and up on the ridge, the shape of a bobcat watching. He wasn't famous. He wasn't trying to be. He was just a person whose life had been shaped by a single night, trying to do something steady with the years that followed. He cleared his throat, looked around at the faces, Gus by the coffee machine, Eleanor near the kitchen door, Gloria in her usual booth, and started speaking into a simple microphone they'd propped up between napkin holders. He didn't talk much about the dramatic part. He mentioned it because people needed the frame. The blizzard, the abandoned truck, the bobcat curled around a baby to keep him warm. But he didn't linger there. Instead, he talked about the wildlife center that took Coda in, about the rehabbers who made the hard choice to let the bobcat go back to the hills instead of keeping him as a symbol. He talked about how many animals never make it to a safe place, how roads are hard on deer, coyotes, foxes, and yes, bobcats. How a small donation can buy medicine, pay for an x-ray, fix a broken fence that keeps a recovering animal from getting out too soon. He didn't sound like a miracle child telling a legend. He sounded like a neighbor giving an update on work that matters. Then he said something simple that made the whole room go still. "I don't remember that night," he admitted. "I was too small. But every winter since, I've had people tell me I shouldn't be here, that I'm some kind of sign. I don't know about signs. What I know is that a lot of strangers chose not to walk away from me, from a hurt bobcat, from each other. This fundraiser is just me trying to carry that forward." If you've ever sat at a community event and watched someone younger than you stand there, voice shaking a little, trying to turn their pain into something useful, you know the ache that moves through a room in a moment like that. While Leo spoke, somewhere across town another screen was lit up. Austin, older now, sat on the edge of a bed in a small apartment. Life had not magically become easy, but it had become quieter. She scrolled through local news on her phone and paused on a clip labeled, "Bobcat Baby Raises Funds for Wildlife Rescue." For a long time, she just stared at the thumbnail. Then she pressed play. The video wasn't long. It showed the mural, the cookies on paper plates, a shot of Leo at the makeshift microphone, talking about rehab enclosures and release sites, and how to drive a little slower on certain stretches of road in winter. At the bottom of the screen, his name appeared on a banner. She whispered it out loud, testing it on her tongue. When he thanked the Wildlife Center for taking care of the bobcat who unknowingly took care of me, she put a hand over her mouth, as if trying to keep something inside from spilling out. No one saw her cry. No one needed to. It was enough that she knew, finally and fully, that he had been held by more than cold metal and bad luck that night. That strangers, and a bobcat, had done for him what she could not. Back at the diner, the fundraiser wound down. People dropped small bills and checks into a glass jar labeled, "For the Wild Ones." Someone pinned up a printed photo of a bobcat at the Wildlife Center bulletin board, a kind of distant cousin to Coda, eyes clear and fur thick. As closing time crept closer, guests said their goodnights and stepped back out into the snow. The neon sign hummed softly. Inside, Gus washed mugs at the sink, sleeves rolled up. Eleanor wiped down the same spot on the counter she always did when she was tired but content. Leo counted the donations, not as if they were proof of his worth, but as fuel for work he believed in. Gloria gathered her knitting, paused at the door and looked back at the mural, giving a small nod to the painted bobcat on the ridge, as if acknowledging an old friend. Then, for one last small moment, the world outside and inside seemed to breathe
together. Through the front windows, beyond the parking lot and across the two-lane road, the tree line stood dark against the snow. If you looked carefully, you might have seen two shapes move between the trunks. Low, silent, cat-like. One larger, one smaller, pausing where the light from the diner could just barely touch them. They stood there for a heartbeat. Then they slipped back into the darkness, leaving no tracks anyone inside would ever find. No one turned their head at that exact second. No one said, "Look." But Leo did pause while drying a plate, feeling an odd sense of calm settle over him, like a blanket laid gently across his shoulders. Sometimes the things we need to feel aren't loud. There's a sense that we made it through another winter, that the wild world around us is still moving, still watching in its own way. Even what once hurt us can leave behind something tender. Maybe as you listen to this, you're thinking about your own long nights. The storms you drove into because you didn't see any other way. The doors you opened expecting emptiness and found something unexpected inside. Maybe you've been the tow driver, the diner owner, the quiet nurse, the rehab worker. Maybe you've been the person who walked into the storm. If there's one thing this Bobcat story leaves us with, it might be this. You are not as alone as you think, and the smallest kindness you offer today may ripple out farther than you will ever see. Before you go, take a moment to ask yourself, where have you seen unlikely warmth in your own life? Who wrapped around you in their own way when everything felt cold? If this story of Gus, Leo, Eleanor, Autumn, and a wild bobcat named Coda has touched something in you, I'd love for you to stay close to this little community we're building here. You can tap like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next quiet story, and share this with someone who might need a reminder that second chances can arrive in very unexpected shapes. And if your heart is tugging you toward the wild ones, the bobcats, the foxes, the animals trying to survive alongside us, consider using Super Thanks or making a small donation to a local wildlife rescue in your area. Even a modest gift can help buy medicine, food, or a safe place for a hurt animal to rest and heal. Together, we can keep making room in this world for both weary people and wild creatures to find a little more warmth.